Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that takes these huge cultural figures, people you've heard of, maybe even loved, and we cut right to the chase. We give you the essential insights from the source material you gave us, basically the shortcut to understanding why they really matter.
And today, we're heading straight for Klickitat Street. We're going deep on Beverly Cleary, an author that, honestly, most of us probably read growing up, especially if you were a kid in the back half of the 20th century. But I think few of us really get how groundbreaking her work actually was for children's books.
Groundbreaking, revolutionary. Yeah, that feels like the right word. I mean, you look at American authors, particularly for kids and young adults, and she's just huge. Our sources threw out this number that honestly stopped me in my tracks. 91 million copies.
81 million.
Sold worldwide since, 1950 when her first book came out. That's not just successful for a children's author. That puts her up there with some of the biggest names in, adult fiction. It's kind of staggering.
Yeah, it really is. And that's the mission for this deep dive, right? To look at the sources, the biography, the critical stuff, figure out why. Why did her books connect so deeply with so many kids for so long? Because Cleary, she wasn't just writing stories. She was really championing something new, something we now call emotional realism.
Okay, emotional realism. Let's unpack that a bit.
Well, she wasn't really doing myths or heavy-handed moral tales, not in the main Klickitat Street stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And not really talking animals, apart from Ralph S. Mouse, who we should definitely get to, but mostly. She focused laser-like on the messy, sometimes confusing, sometimes really funny everyday life of ordinary kids. Middle-class kids, specifically.
Right. So let's name the key players in this universe she built. You've got Henry Huggins, of course, the sort of original good kid with his dog, Ribsy.
Yep. And then, crucially, the Quimbys. Ramona Quimby, the chaotic, totally unfiltered younger sister, and Beezus, her, let's say, often exasperated older sister.
And they all live in this very specific place.
Oh, yeah. The Grant Park neighborhood. Northeast Portland, Oregon. Klickitat Street, the school nearby.
Yeah.
It's all so real, so vividly drawn. It almost feels like another character in the books. It shows how committed she was to grounding everything in something observable, something tangible. She basically put her own childhood neighborhood on the literary map forever.
And here's a fact that just anchors the whole thing, speaks to how long her influence lasted. Beverly Cleary, born 1916, died 2021.
Wow.
She lived to be 104 years old. Just think about that for a second. The sheer sweep of history she saw, World War I, the Depression, TV coming in, the moon landing, the internet, all of it. And through it all, she's writing these stories about childhood that somehow stayed relevant.
Writing across, 3-4 generations of readers?
Yeah.
And yet, those core feelings she tapped into, the frustration of being little, the confusion, the fierce sort of determination kids have, that stuff just never got old. That's the genius we're digging into. And it really started with her own childhood.
Okay, let's go there. Section 1. The reluctant reader who became a literary pioneer. So she was born Beverly Atlee Bunn, 1916, McMinnville, Oregon.
Right. But her very first years, up until she was about 6, were actually out on a farm. Yamhill, Oregon. Rural setting. She was an only child, raised Presbyterian. Pretty quiet, farm-focused life.
And then, bam, big shift. The family packs up and moves to Portland. Her dad got a job there as a bank security officer.
And that move from the quiet farm to the city, even Portland back in the 1920s, that was tough for her. A real shock to the system. But the sources suggest the really difficult part, the thing that kind of shaped her future path, happened at school. First grade.
The infamous blackbirds.
Exactly. This is the critical origin story moment for her entire career. She started school and she really, really struggled with reading. And back then it was common practice, maybe not the best practice, but common to group kids by ability. Kids who were having trouble, they got put in the lowest group, the blackbirds.
And she said later to be a blackbird was to be disgraced.
Yeah. Can you imagine? First grade. And you're already labeled, shamed. She felt embarrassed, singled out as being slower than the others. And the sources show it wasn't just that she found the mechanics hard, which she later thought might have been partly because she'd been sick a lot, things like chickenpox, smallpox. But it was also something else, something more profound. She was bored out of her mind.
She found the books themselves incredibly stupid.
Right. That's the key. It wasn't just difficult, it was uninteresting. These early reader books, they were often really simplistic, repetitive, see spot run, Or they had these weirdly formal, unnatural ways of talking, or were just trying to hammer home some obvious moral. She just didn't get why books couldn't be funny, or about real people doing normal, recognizable things.
So that feeling, that frustration of finding books totally unrelatable as a 6-year-old, that became the driving force for her entire career. She basically spent her life writing the books she wished she'd had.
It's an amazing feedback loop, isn't it? So she's struggling, feeling ashamed about being a blackbird. And then, 3rd grade, rainy afternoon, epiphany time.
The Dutch Twins.
Yes, by Lucy Fitch Perkins. And just the title tells you something, right? It's about twins, ordinary kids, having adventures, getting into little scrapes, but just being kids. In Holland, okay, but still kids. It wasn't fantasy, it wasn't preachy.
It's relatable, finally.
Exactly. For young Beverly, who found everything else either dull or trying too hard to teach her something, this was just fun, pure enjoyment. And that was the moment. Reading clicked. It went from being this source of shame and boredom to something she actually wanted to do. She started spending tons of time at the library after that. That need for stories about real kids set her whole direction.
It's really powerful, that symmetry. The thing that caused her pain, the lack of relatable books, became the thing she dedicated her life to fixing.
And people noticed her talent early on. The sources mentioned that by 6th grade, she was writing these essays for class, and one of her teachers actually pulled her aside and said, based on these, you should think about becoming a children's writer.
Wow. So the seed was planted way back then.
Yeah, even though actually getting there, becoming a published author, that took a while longer.
Right, it wasn't a straight path. Let's trace that journey in section 2. From library science to full-time writer. So she's going through school, aiming for college, but this is happening during the Great Depression.
Yeah, that context is crucial. Money was incredibly tight for everyone. So to make college affordable, she started out at Chaffee Junior College down in California. But her goal, even then, was pretty clear. She wanted to be a children's librarian. That connection to kids and books was already locked in.
Then she transfers to UC Berkeley, gets her BA in English in 1938. And she wasn't just studying, she was working hard to pay for it. Our sources list jobs like seamstress, chambermaid.
Real grit there. You can definitely see echoes of that determination, that need to make ends meet in some of her characters later, like the Quimby family.
And Berkeley was also where she met her future husband, Clarence Cleary, at a school dance, apparently.
Right. And this little biographical detail actually tells you something important about her personality. Her parents, the sources say, really didn't approve of Clarence because he was Roman Catholic and they were Presbyterian.
A bigger deal back then.
Definitely. So, faced with their disapproval, what did Beverly and Clarence do? They eloped in 1940, just went off and got married. That streak of independence, that sort of refusal to just accept rules that didn't make sense to her,
Right.
that's pure Ramona, isn't it? It was part of Beverly herself.
Absolutely. And she showed that same focus in her career path, too. After Berkeley, she went and got a second bachelor's degree. This one specifically in library science from the University of Washington in 1939, really cementing that professional focus.
And that experience working as a librarian, that became the real launch pad for her writing. First in Yakima, Washington until about 1940, and then later during the war, she was a post librarian at an Army hospital in Oakland, California from 42 to 45. This put her right on the front lines with her audience.
Front lines is a good way to put it, because this is where that first grade frustration kind of comes back, but now she's the librarian, the one trying to help the kids.
Exactly. She saw these kids coming into the library day after day, and they'd ask her for books about, boys like them, girls like them, relatable characters. And she realized she just didn't have enough good stuff to give them. She felt this deep empathy for them.
She could see the gap plain as day. The books on the shelves were often about kids who were too perfect or too wealthy, or maybe British children having adventures that didn't quite resonate, or they were just there to teach a lesson.
Right. And she was doing story hours, reading aloud to the kids, and she started really noticing how silly some of the writing was, how disconnected from the way kids actually experience the world, or even just the way people talk.
This is where the famous puppy line comes in.
Oh, yeah. This is priceless. The sources highlight this specific line from a children's book she had to read aloud. It went something like, "Bow wow, I like the green grass," said the puppy.
A puppy discussing his landscaping preferences.
It's absurd. And Cleary just thought, that's ridiculous. No puppy I had known talked like that. It's funny, but it's also profound. It crystallized for her just how much children's literature at the time was missing the mark. It lacked honesty. It lacked realism. It lacked a genuine kid's voice. And that realization, that professional frustration, really pushed her towards writing herself. She was already in her 30s when she started.
So it wasn't about wanting to be famous initially. It was almost a professional obligation she felt.
I think so. She talked about the missionary spirit of librarians, this idea that they had a duty to encourage reading, yes, but also to find good, appropriate books for kids. She felt she had to provide what the kids were actually asking for, what they needed, stories that felt real. She took their requests seriously.
And that seriousness, that commitment, leads us right to Klickitat Street, Section 3, creating Klickitat Street, Henry, Ramona, and this idea of emotional realism.
Okay, so first book, Henry Huggins, comes out in 1950. And the idea for Henry, it really did come directly from those story hours in Yakima. She was essentially just writing down the kinds of stories she'd been making up for those kids who wanted books about boys like them.
So Henry was the answer to that request. Just an average kid, not super rich, not a genius. His problems were things like, how do I get my new dog Ribsy home on the bus without the driver noticing? Or, what do I do with all these guppies I won? Hilariously ordinary stuff.
Exactly, the stuff of real childhood. But even Henry Huggins wasn't an immediate slam dunk. The sources say it was actually rejected at first by the publisher, Morrow. She had to revise it.
And that revision is absolutely key, isn't it? Because that's where the Quimbys come in.
That's right. The first draft apparently mostly had only children, kind of reflecting her own upbringing, but during the revision she realized she needed more family dynamics, more neighborhood texture, so she added these two sisters who live nearby, Beatrice, or Beezus, and her little sister, Ramona Quimby.
Just to add some flavor, some sibling reality, annoyance, rivalry, that whole dynamic.
Yeah, but Ramona, well, Ramona wasn't meant to stay in the background. She was introduced almost as a pest, this disruptive force in Henry's world. But she was just too vivid, too full of chaotic energy. She kind of demanded her own spotlight.
She steals the show.
Pretty much. So even though they appear in Henry Huggins, the first book really about the sisters Beezus and Ramona doesn't come out until 1955. And that happened partly because a publisher specifically asked her to write a book about a kindergartner.
Which she wasn't keen on at first.
No, she resisted. Apparently, she'd never even been to kindergarten herself, so she didn't feel she knew it well enough.
Yeah.
But then something shifted. Her own twin children, Malcolm and Marianne, were born in 1955.
Real-life research.
You got it. Suddenly, she had this front-row seat to the unfiltered, often baffling, hilarious, intense world of very young children. And that experience, that close observation, gave her everything she needed to really bring Ramona fully to life, especially in books like Ramona the Pest, which came out later in '68.
So that connection between her life and her writing is super direct there. And it all feeds into that core theme you mentioned, the daily minutia of childhood, making compelling drama out of everyday problems.
Exactly. Small injustices, perplexing mysteries, the stuff that feels huge when you're 5 or 8.
Yeah.
She took that seriously. That's the emotional realism.
Let's pause on that emotional realism, because other writers wrote about kids' feelings, but Cleary did it differently, didn't she?
I think the difference was the seriousness with which she treated the child's perspective. Like, think about Ramona wanting to be a proper passenger in the grocery cart, needing a seatbelt and a ticket. It's funny to us.
Right.
But for Ramona, it's logical. It's important. Or, oh gosh, the time she wears her pajamas to school on D.E.A.R. Day, drop everything and read day because she completely misunderstood the instructions. For an adult, it's a cute mistake. For Ramona, it's mortifying. Public humiliation of the highest order.
Or the toothpaste. That one always gets me. Trying to be helpful by squeezing the entire tube into the sink so it wouldn't get lost.
Yes.
Then realizing the horror of wasting family money and frantically trying to stuff it back in the tube. It's so specific, so physical, and so psychologically true to how a kid might panic about disappointing their parents. That's pure Cleary.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
She understood that to a child, a broken doll or getting a bad haircut or, like you said, the toothpaste fiasco, or even taking one bite out of every single apple in a box because you're furious, which Ramona does.
Oh, I remember that.
Those aren't trivial things. There are moments of genuine crisis, deep feeling, domestic tragedy even.
Yeah.
And treating them with that weight, that respect, that's why the book still feels so real.
Okay, but wait. We're talking all about realism, ordinary life. How does Ralph S. Mouse fit into this? You know, the mouse and the motorcycle. A talking mouse who rides a toy motorcycle. That seems like a total departure, doesn't it?
That's a really fair question. And the sources do address this. The Ralph S. Mouse series, there were 3 main books starting in '65. It definitely feels different from Klickitat Street. It's more fantastical, obviously.
So what's the deal? Was she just trying something different?
Well, yes, partly. It shows her versatility. You could see Ralph as maybe an escape valve, a way to play with more traditional adventure story tropes. But even in the Ralph books, the core Cleary philosophy is still there. Ralph isn't just, a generic talking animal sidekick.
Right, he has personality.
A lot of personality. He's independent. He's adventurous. He kind of chafes against his big, cautious mouse family. He wants freedom, autonomy. So the emotions driving him, that desire for independence, for adventure, maybe even a bit of rebellion, those are still very real, very relatable kid feelings. The vehicle is fantasy, sure, but the emotional engine, that's still pure Cleary realism in a way.
That makes sense. Like the emotional truth remains, even if the circumstances are fantastical.
Okay, so whether it was realism or fantasy with a real core, her work clearly resonated. The awards started piling up.
Oh, absolutely. Huge recognition. The big one, the Newbery Medal. She won that in 1984 for Dear Mr. Henshaw. And that book is interesting because it shows her evolving, too. It's quite different from the Ramona books.
How so?
It tackles tougher, more contemporary issues for the time, specifically divorce and loneliness. And it does it all through letters and journal entries from this boy, Lee Botts. It's a really poignant, quieter book in some ways.
So she wasn't just sticking to the funny stuff. The emotional realism could also mean tackling harder truths as society changed. Exactly. And she also won the National Book Award in 1981, specifically for the paperback edition of Ramona and Her Mother. That award really recognized how much she connected with kids directly through those accessible paperback editions.
And the Ramona books just kept getting accolades, right? Newbery Honors, too?
Yep. Both Ramona and her father and Ramona Quimby, age 8, received Newbery Honors, which, for anyone not familiar, is basically like being the runner-up for the medal.
Yeah.
So multiple times, her work was judged to be right at the very top tier of American children's literature. Just incredible consistency.
And for listeners who want to hear her story in her own words, she wrote memoirs, too.
Yes, 2 of them. A Girl from Yamhill, about her childhood, and My Own 2 Feet, covering her college and early adult years. They're really insightful.
And we should probably quickly mention the screen adaptations. Her characters were so strong they jumped off the page.
For sure. There was that Canadian TV series Ramona back in 1988, starring a very young Sarah Polley, which people might remember.
I remember that.
And then, much more recently, the 2010 movie Ramona and Beezus, with Joey King as Ramona and Selena Gomez as Beezus. It just shows that the emotional core works, whatever the format.
Okay, let's move into section 4. Critical significance and her monumental legacy. Selling 91 million books tells you she was popular, obviously. But what did the literary critics really point to as her unique contribution? What made her important, not just popular?
A lot of the critical attention focused on the sophistication of her style, especially her humor. The New York Times often mentioned her humorous, lively style, but it went deeper than just being funny. Roger Sutton, who was editor of the Hornbook magazine and a major voice in children's lit, he called her funny in a very sophisticated way.
Sophisticated how? What does that mean in this context, not just slapstick?
Right. Sutton's point was that Cleary gets really close to satire sometimes, but she never crosses the line into being cruel or mean to her characters. The humor comes from the situation or from the child's completely earnest misunderstanding of the illogical adult world. It never comes from mocking the child themselves, especially Ramona. Cleary never lets you laugh at Ramona in the way that diminishes her feelings or her dignity. When Ramona, say, draws those pictures of people with giant feet and gets upset when the teacher assumes one is her mother, the humor is in Ramona's literalness and in maybe the teacher's awkwardness, but never in making fun of Ramona's drawing skills or her intentions. There's this deep underlying respect for the child's perspective. And kids pick up on that respect, That's a big part of why the books lasted.
So, respecting the character's struggle while finding the humor in the situation. Situational irony, not just laughing at someone.
Precisely. And this whole approach, this honesty, it wasn't just nice. Critics recognized it was genuinely ahead of its time. Professor Eliza Dresang said Cleary's writing was decades ahead of her time in its accuracy, its honesty, its ability to just portray real kids without talking down to them or simplifying them.
And there was another quote about her longevity.
Yeah, but Professor Pat Flagger made a great point. She said Cleary's work stays fresh because she fundamentally understood, kids understood, that they are sometimes confused or frightened by the world around them and that they feel deeply about things that adults can dismiss. Cleary was maybe the first major author to treat, say, the tragedy of a melted popsicle or the injustice of an older sibling getting away with something with the same kind of narrative gravity that an adult problem might get in another book.
That makes so much sense. And that combination, massive sales, critical respect, groundbreaking style, it led to just enormous institutional recognition.
Oh, the honors are incredible. And they really underscore her impact. She won the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award back in 1975. That's a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Library Association for major contributions to children's literature. Then, the National Medal of Arts in 2003. The Library of Congress named her a living legend in 2000. Just top-tier stuff.
And back in Portland, her hometown, the connection is literally cemented in place, isn't it?
It really is. It's wonderful. The school she went to as a kid, Fernwood Grammar School, it's now officially the Beverly Cleary School. And in Grant Park, the actual neighborhood where Henry and Ramona supposedly lived, there's the Beverly Cleary Sculpture Garden for Children. You can go there and see statues of Henry, Ribsy, and of course Ramona mid-stride.
That's fantastic. But maybe the most fitting honors are the ones that circle back to where she started professionally. Librarianship.
Absolutely. In 1997, the main children's room at the Central Library in Portland was named the Beverly Cleary Children's Library. And even more significantly, perhaps, her alma mater, the University of Washington's Information School, the Library Science School, they established the Beverly Cleary Endowed Chair for Children and Youth Services.
Wow. So that ensures her commitment to training good children's librarians continues on.
Exactly. It honors that missionary spirit she talked about, making sure future librarians understand the importance of connecting kids with the right books. It's a really profound legacy.
And even Berkeley, her undergrad alma mater, named a huge dorm after her Beverly Cleary Hall. Her impact really spanned literature, libraries, education.
It was so broad and so recognized that even after she passed away in 2021 at 104, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution honoring her life and legacy, sponsored by Oregon Senator Ron Wyden. Think about that, a bipartisan Senate resolution for a children's author. It shows how deeply ingrained she is in American culture.
That's incredible. And one last fun piece of legacy, Dear Day.
Oh yeah, drop everything and read Day. Her publisher, HarperCollins, promotes it on her birthday, April 12th. The idea of just stopping everything and reading. It feels like such a perfect tribute to her, doesn't it? Capturing that quiet joy she brought to so many kids.
So, okay, we've covered her life, her work, the impact. When you boil it all down, what's the core takeaway from this deep dive? What does it all mean?
I think the core genius of Beverly Cleary was her ability to see the universal in the specific, the monumental in the mundane. She took those small, ordinary, sometimes embarrassing moments of middle-class childhood, the fights with siblings, the worries about parents, the small triumphs, the confusing rules, and she infused them with real, recognizable emotion and humor. That sophisticated, respectful humor.
She basically validated the inner lives of ordinary kids. She saw them and she wrote them down when maybe nobody else was, certainly not with that level of honesty and fun.
Exactly. She was the bridge for millions of kids who looked at the books available before her and just didn't see themselves. She said, yeah, Henry Huggins and his dog problems, Ramona Quimby and her messy feelings, they deserve a place in literature just as much as any prince or talking animal from classic stories. It was revolutionary in its simplicity almost.
And we know her influence runs deep. You see writers like Judy Blume or John Saska later on, who also push boundaries in children's lit. They point back to Cleary as someone who opened the door, who gave permission for children's books to be messy and real and funny all at once.
Her whole career really came from that insight she had as a librarian, didn't it? That kids weren't getting what they needed. They needed books about them, not just fantasies or moral lessons handed down from on high.
Which brings us, I think, to our final thought for you, the listener. Cleary's revolution was injecting realism into the everyday stuff of mid-century childhood bikes, bullies, sisters, allowances. So if her work felt so fresh because it captured that reality, what are the essential, maybe messy, maybe awkward, but totally honest parts of your daily life now? Or the reality of family life today in this digital age with all its new pressures and weirdnesses? What parts of that modern experience are still waiting for their Beverly Cleary, waiting for a writer who can look at them with that same sharp eye, that same blend of almost satire and deep, deep respect?
What are today's Blackbird moments? What are the things that feel huge to kids now, maybe related to online life or social pressures or changing family structures that feel like the equivalent of Ramona's toothpaste trauma, but aren't being written about because they seem too small, too temporary, or maybe just too uncomfortable? That's the space Cleary carved out, and maybe that's the challenge she leaves us with.
A great place to leave it. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the world of Beverly Cleary and Klickitat Street. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Keep reading and keep noticing the big drama in the little things.